Well, thank you. It's good to be here in Texas. We flew in from Southern California last night. Got to have some Texas barbecue for lunch. I love your guys' food here. I don't super love your August weather. I have to admit that. When I walked out of the airport and felt the heat, I was like, oh, shoot, we're in Texas. But yeah, so Brett and I thought I'd just start with telling you a little bit about us and our family. Brett and I have been married 27 years. We have 5 kids, and we actually have 3 granddaughters. So this is our family. We always look this put together, too. This is how we are all the time. No, actually, it took hours for us to clean up and look like this. This is just a snapshot. But our oldest daughter, Lexi, here, holding her youngest, Emma. And then our son, Micah, who got married last May. This is our daughter-in-law, Margaret. And so Lexi's 29, Micah's 23, Paige is 21, Ella's 17, and Jonah is 13. And he has grown like a foot since last year, so he's actually like up to here now. And then our 3 my favorite people in the picture are little Annie girl, Sadie, and Emma, who's now 1. So if you do the math, we've been married 27 years, but we have a 29-year-old. So there's a story there. And actually, there is a story there. So part of my story is that I grew up in a Christian home, went to church every Sunday. With my family, my parents are very devout believers and followers of Christ. But I grew up going to church on Sunday, and that was my Christianity. And I lived my life the way I wanted to the rest of the week. And so by the time I was in junior high and high school, I called myself a Christian. If you would have met 16-year-old Erin and said, "Are you a Christian?" I would have said, "Absolutely." I was not a Christian. I didn't follow Christ at all. I never even cracked open my Bible. I didn't know anything about God, really. I knew a lot about positive thinking and messages of powerful messages about living a great life, but I didn't know Christ. And so my senior year of high school, just about 5 months before graduation, I found out I was pregnant. And my boyfriend and I had dated off and on through high school, kind of a typical high school relationship. And so I was in a situation where I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to tell my parents. So I told a couple of friends that I thought I was pregnant. And then one of the friends happened to be a Christian. And he said, "Oh, I know a lady at my church. And she runs the Teen Mom program at my church. And she'd talk to you." So he got me on the phone with this lady who ran this little teen mom ministry in this little church in Anaheim, California. And she told me about a crisis pregnancy center. And she said I could go there and get a test and they could help me out. So I did that. And I still remember the nurse walking in the room and saying, "You are pregnant." And so as a 17-year-old, almost graduate of high school, I got help from this Teen Mom program in this little church. And those ladies there brought me in. They loved me. They walked me through how to tell my parents. They walked me through even thinking about adoption and would that be something I would consider. I ended up deciding against that. I ended up deciding against abortion, even though I had strong urging from my boyfriend who was taking a football scholarship and going to live his life. And he said it would ruin our lives if we did this, so I needed to get an abortion. And I knew the teacher at my high school that took all the girls to get abortions, and several of my friends had already made that choice. So it was definitely one that was available and one that I had to consider and think about. But by God's grace, it wasn't because I was following Christ, but by God's grace, I decided not to do that and gave birth to my daughter, Lexi, a few months after graduating high school, actually just about 3 months after graduation. And through being pregnant and a 17-year-old and going to that little church, now all of a sudden, when the gospel was preached, my ears were open. And I was now connecting the teaching that I had heard all my life with reality and what was going on. And so I gave my life to Christ at that church. and started following him. And when my daughter Lexi was almost 1 year old, there was a Christian college called Biola University that was 10 minutes from my parents' house. And my parents said, why don't you try to go there if you want to go? I'd been doing community college classes. And so I transferred to Biola my second year of college with a 1 year old single mom. I was one of 2 single moms on campus that I knew of. And anyway, I met Brett that first year of school. Now, he was a youth pastor already, and we met on a school activity that he had his roommate finagle me to go on. I didn't know about that. Anyway, but when we met and started talking, and then I'm thinking, oh, this guy's so nice, and then he tells me he's already in junior high ministry, and I'm thinking, oh, that's hilarious. Like a single mom with a junior high pastor, like pastors are like holy people, like this is hilarious. It would never work. It did work out. And now we've been married 27 years. So we got married, Lexi was 2.5. Brett was able to adopt her legally when she was 6. And then we went on to have 4 more, and which is now why I'm 47 years old, but already a grandma of 3 little girls. Biasly, I think the cutest little girls in the world. So that's our messy, crazy family. And so as parents, I mean, actually, Lexi will be 30 in October, which really makes me feel old to say that I'm going to have a 30-year-old daughter. But we have been navigating this issue, well, parenting, but this issue of technology for a long time. And I was telling some of your staff at lunch, I loved my 2 grandmas. They were dear to me, and I loved to ask their advice on kids, especially when my kids were babies. I'd be like, Grandma, what do I do? With technology, this has been one of those issues that I can't ask Grandma about because she wasn't fighting these things when she was raising kids. This wave of change in our culture with technology has been something for us new generation of parents that we've had to navigate kind of blindly. And have you felt that at all, parents? As you've tried to, you feel like you're kind of in the dark here. Well, we'll try this. And okay, that didn't work. Now we're going to have to try something else. So when our daughter Lexi was first asking us for a cell phone, she was asking us for a flip phone. Remember those? And so we've gone a long way in having to navigate this. And I want to show you a commercial. This is actually a Nutri-Grain granola bar commercial that I thought was stunning. And I think articulates well the challenge and the change for us as parents and grandparents that we're having to navigate with our kids as far as the world of technology. So watch this.
When you were a kid, what did you do for fun?
So we go blueberry picking, for instance. Just some juice.
But it's true. We go watermelons, plantains.
I found an old sign which was big enough for me to sit on a bit of crates about it. It was very slick, very fast.
I had a few fish in my basket, and I looked up on this bluff, and here's this black bear sitting there watching me. If he starts chasing me, I'm going to keep throwing the fish out of my basket until he's gorged and he won't bother me. And what do you like to do for fun? You go door to door, get with the kids, and you play lots of games, hide and seek, just going out to the field and playing baseball.
And we built these massive forts, the kind that you can actually sit in and play in, with our friends. And it was just really wonderful.
So what do you like to do for fun?
Video games, definitely.
I like to go on my phone,
Text, some email.
My favorite thing to do in the world is definitely watching videos and playing video games. Those take up so much of my time.
3 hours or 3 to 4 hours a day. Same.
5 hours straight.
Just last week, I watched 23 episodes of a TV series in less than 4 days.
I forget. I'm in a house, I have parents, I have a sister, I have a dog, I just think I'm in the video game, I completely get lost. I would die if I didn't have my tablet.
Whenever I feel upset, video games and I feel normal. It's really wonderful.
When your daughters grow up, your great-great-grandkids, what do you think will happen if this trend continues?
It's scary to think that they'll never have to leave the house.
Cindy grew up doing a lot of the things that I did and enjoyed, and I see what my grandsons are doing today, and it's mind-boggling.
By the time they have kids, it's going to be a really different environment.
I'm actually feeling a little sad because I feel like he's missing out on what's out there in the beautiful world.
So the first stunning thing was that a granola bar company came up with that commercial. It's so powerful. But don't you think that highlights the generational gap that some of us feel when it comes to this issue? So I'm hoping today that we can change that a little bit, that we can help a little bit with that gap with some good thinking on this topic of technology. So when it comes to Generation Z, so Generation Z is basically if you're born in 1999 to 2015. That's the generation we're talking about. There's been so many studies on Gen Zers, as we're calling them, but the most prominent national study was done by Barna Research Group in partnership with a ministry called Impact 360. And it was done just a year ago on Generation Z. And so they surveyed over 1,500 young people on many different topics. But here's what they found when it came to the issue of technology. So time spent just on a smartphone each day for the typical Gen Zer is 5 to 6 hours. Now that doesn't include computers, video games, watching television, iPads, and more. And they found that young women spend more time on their phones and more time on social media than young men, actually. And the more time that they spent on social media is directly correlated with their increase in insecurity, with their feelings of isolation, with anxiety, and of course with being critical of themselves. And of course, and then they found too that Gen Zers spend 6 to 9 hours daily consuming media from a various amount of screens. Now, to their credit, one thing that Barna Research found is that 60% of Gen Zers, so more than half, actually freely admitted that their generation spends too much time on screens. They're aware of that. More than half of them admitted that. But 12% of those surveyed is what Barna classified as discerning when it comes to their use of technology. So how did Barna classify discerning students? Discerning students were those who agreed that their generation spent too much time on screens and reported feeling bad about their own screen use. So these were young people who were aware of the potential downsides to their devices. They were at least aware of it and wanted to do something about it, at least in their own lives. But that was 12%. So that means that 88% of the young people surveyed were not discerning at all when it came to technology. Now, of course, it's very easy for those of us who aren't in Generation Z to talk about young people and their struggles with technology, but increasingly, us adults are having some of the same struggles with our managing of technology. So that means you and me. And so it no longer surprises me when just a few months ago, my daughter and I were at dinner, and we were sitting next to an older couple out to dinner who stayed on their phones the entire time they were eating dinner together and didn't say a word to each other. And so, surprisingly, my daughter actually noticed that on her own. And so it doesn't surprise me when I see adults in the same habits that we criticize young people for. So, how can we help our families to get in a place where we have some self-control, where we have some discernment when it comes to this really important issue of technology that is just pervasive in life. We can't fight it. It's a part of life. How do we do it well? How do we do it with discernment? We aren't going to suggest today that you sell your homes and go move to an Amish community. I mean, you might want to do that. That's not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how do we live in this time and place well as followers of Christ, and how do we help the young people in our lives to do that too. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to lay out 3 important steps to develop a family technology plan. Okay? This is for your home and hopefully for your church. So we'll talk about that, how we can do this as a community together. And then we're going to take some Q&A, and Brett will join me up here, and we'll take your questions. So as questions come up, write them down, remember, because we want to hear your questions. Okay, so first step when it comes to an issue, especially an issue of technology, is that we have to develop a theology of technology. So what does that mean? Brett talked about theology in the service this morning. Well, isn't theology the study of God? What does technology have to do with that? Well, this means that we take our Christian worldview, Christian truth, and we figure out how it applies to technology. How should we think about that? So, what does that look like? Well, we have to start with biblical anthropology. What does that mean? That's a big word. It just means our view of what it means to be human. That's where we start. So, what's the Christian view of what it means to be human? Well, first, that we are image bearers of the God of the universe. That every single human being that you see is made in the image of God. And so, therefore, they have value and dignity just because of that. And so, we're valuable. And so, when we often talk about technology, especially with young people, we often start the talk, when we talk to them about it, on negative terms. But that's actually not consistent with Christian theology. Technology is not just negative, bad, bad, bad. Technology is actually the result of human beings being made in God's image and being sub-creators with God. So, when we define let's define technology so we understand what I mean. What is technology? Well, technology is created by taking raw materials and reordering them for human purposes, right? This is what technology is. Technology is the result of human ingenuity and creativity of human beings. It's actually amazing. It's how most of us are driving our cars. That's technology. We use it all the time. I used my map to get here this morning, to order my coffee, to show you the slides. Technology is a beautiful sign of human creativity. So technology is actually a reflection of our Creator. So we should start there when we talk about it, especially with young people, and talk about how it is really good. I mean, think about just in the medical world and the advances of technology and how this has improved human life. As a mom who has, as my mom has stage 4 cancer, my dad had a stroke several years ago. He's with the Lord now, but just the medical technology that my parents were able to take advantage of as they have struggled with disease is absolutely amazing. This is good, right? And we can rejoice in that. And so we can think about it in all kinds of ways. Medicine, clothing, buildings, everything, and how technology has brought about good. And this is something, of course, that God has commanded human beings to do in Genesis 1. What does God say in Genesis 1, 27 through 28? It says, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth, and what? Subdue it. Take what God has made and make more things with it. So, these are things that we can actually give thanks to God for. That's the proper thinking of it through a Christian worldview. But of course, our theology doesn't just leave us there. It gives us a second key aspect about human beings. And sometimes we may overemphasize the fallen aspect of technology, which is oftentimes what the younger generation, that's all they hear from us as we talk about it. It's bad, 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 bad. Yet it's omnipresent in their lives. It's been a part of their lives from the beginning of their lives. And frankly, they see us using it all the time for our purposes. And so they'll quickly dismiss adults as being hypocritical or overly critical of them and their use of technology. So, emphasize the good, but then also the second thing that we need to do to navigate technology is to remember the second aspect of human beings, and that is that we are fallen, that we are rebellious, that in every single human heart, we want to be God. And we would like to be in charge. We all tend towards rebellion, right? And so we'll see that. As fallen image bearers, what we'll do is take something like technology and then we'll use it for evil purposes, right? And I mean, we could probably spend the rest of the time talking about technology being used for evil purposes, right? For instance, the FBI estimates that each day there are 500,000 active online predators. 500,000 every day. And that half of their victims are 12 to 15-year-olds. Every day. We see it, of course, in hatred spewed all over social media. If you want to see evil, go on social media for a little while. Millions of hours of consuming porn online. I mean, on the internet has caused something like pornography to just explode. And the brokenness is, of course, revealed in our use of technology. It can be apparent, right? So, this is a two-part view of humanity that Christians have to hold in tension. But it also best explains the reality of what we see, don't you think? And I love that about the Christian worldview, actually, that it helps us make sense of the world that we see all around us. So, thinking about technology, first, a theology of technology. What is technology? It's actually a reflection of human beings, the good and the bad, isn't it? Another thing we have to think through when it comes to the issue of technology is that we have to develop a correct theology, but we have to also help our families to navigate this thing called technology. So, the first thing we have to remember is that technology is not neutral. And so oftentimes when we think of technology, we'll think about it in two categories, moral and immoral, right? Now, good and bad, these are important categories, of course, but we have to expand our categories when it comes to thinking about it beyond just good, bad, good, bad. So a smartphone, for example, this thing is neither moral or immoral in and of itself. But if our categories are only moral, immoral, good, bad, then that limits our thinking actually on the complex topic of technology and our use of it. So, while technology itself may not be good or evil, we also need to understand that it's not neutral, which means technology itself has the power to shape us just by using it. So what do I mean? Okay, so think about a car. Okay, our cars have different gears, right? So we put it in drive and we go forward. Or we put it in reverse and we go backwards. And then our car also has a neutral, and it won't move at all. It'll just stand still, right? Technology does not have a neutral gear. Technology is always pushing us in a direction. That's what I mean by it's not neutral. So just by using it, it moves us in directions. And it actually might be forming our ways of thinking, our habits of attention. Have you noticed that change in you at all? It might be shaping our expectations of how quickly we should receive information. It might be undermining authority by merely presenting to us an overwhelming amount of information. Or it might just be developing in us a powerful appetite to be entertained at all times. So have you noticed, for example, how your phone and the ease of access to things has changed your habits of attention? Have you noticed that in yourself? Have you ever noticed how much more impatient you are now when your Starbucks app doesn't load fast enough? I noticed that. Or what about our expectations for people to get back to us about something? Are you less patient with people now? Has it shifted your wanting for things faster? Especially like if you don't know something. Like the knee-jerk reaction is like, oh, I'll just Google it. I can find out right now. Siri, right? I mean, have you ever felt your phone vibrate in your back pocket and it wasn't there actually? Because I have. Or it didn't actually vibrate. And I was like, oh, I could have sworn it did. So that's what I mean. So think about how it has changed so much of our expectations. Let's just take one issue. Okay, we'll just talk about watching a movie. Okay, so let's think about in the old days, for those of us who are under 20 years old, the old days versus how we primarily watch movies now. So I was recently talking to a woman who's in her late 80s, and she talked about going to see It's a Wonderful Life in the movie theater with her grandma. And she still remembers how the movie theater smelled and how the whole town came together to see It's a Wonderful Life and the debut. And she talks about this experience, and she had this amazing experience watching this movie. Okay, so movies used to be a fixed location, right? You had to go somewhere to see a movie. Now, we can take movies wherever we go. We can watch them anytime, any place. Movies, how is it different to watch a movie in a theater, say with a group of people like this? You're having a shared experience, right? You're all watching the same movie. You're all reacting to different scenes. You're all seeing the same thing. What about today? Well, today I can watch movies completely isolated from the rest of the world. No one else is having the experience that I'm having. And then you think about how something like this also changes our accountability. I mean, accountability-wise, you used to have to go watch something in public with a bunch of people. How would it affect our accountability when in private I can just watch something and no one else would know? And so the point about technology not being neutral, I think helps us just to simply understand its power. So instead of simply saying, no, technology's bad, we have actually another category that helps us to expand our questions and our reflections and gets us to ask another set of questions, like, what is this thing for? What is it for? Another important question to ask yourself and your family, how is it shaping me? How is it changing me? Is it changing you? If so, how is it? How can I protect myself from it? And then another important question, how can I use this wisely? So the power of technology to push us in certain directions is certainly something the developers of technologies understand well. So this is an article that came out a few years ago. You can Google it if you want to read the whole thing. It's called The Tech Industry's War on Kids. And notice the subtitle here, how psychology is being used as a weapon against children. Okay, the article goes on to say how Silicon Valley executives bring in psychologists to their offices to learn how to manipulate young people to spend more and more and more time on their platform. It's called persuasive technology. That's another thing you can look up if you want to dig into this, which is basically the discipline in which digital machines and apps are configured to alter human thoughts and behavior. Here's a quote from the article, and this is what it says. It says, "These parents have no idea that lurking behind their kids' screens and phones are a multitude of psychologists, neuroscientists, and social science experts who use their knowledge of psychological vulnerabilities to devise products that capture kids' attention for the sake of industry profit." So obviously, tech executives know this. That's why, for example, the big tech industry gurus like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, who are parents, had very strict limits on technology when their kids were young because they knew what this article is saying. And so Insider Magazine did an article about Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and said the two biggest tech figures in recent history seldom let their own kids play on the very products they helped to create. Now, why would that be? Why would they protect their own kids from their own product? And Insider Magazine actually went on to talk about other tech industry people and said the CEO of Google told the New York Times in 2018 that, so this is the CEO of Google, that his 11-year-old son did not have a cell phone and that he limits the time his children spend watching television. The CEO of Google. And Evan Spiegel, who is the CEO of Snapchat, which is one of the #1 social media platforms of Gen Z and has over almost 6 million active users, he told Insider Magazine that he imposes a limit of 1.5 hours screen time per week for his kids. 1.5 hours. What was the average Gen Z? 6 to 9 hours a day. So what does the CEO of Snapchat understand about technology that maybe most parents don't? So all these creators of technology understand technology, just the use of it is not neutral. And that it has the power to shape our kids just by using it. So they created their own family technology plans, and that's what we have to do. So notice our first two steps. We've thought through theology, the nature of human beings, the nature of technology, and now we can move to practical steps after we've thought about the bigger topics of it. And so this is the process as Christians that we just have to go through to reflect on the nature of things and then to allow that to infuse and inform our practical decisions, things we do every single day to make about all the kinds of things we do in our lives. We have to use our Christian worldview to help us make good decisions. So where do we start when it comes to decision making for our families? Well, I think we start by communicating to our families in our home that we have a family mantra that is this: we are different. And I mean that you literally say this out loud in your home. We are different. We are different. If we follow Christ, our primary allegiance is to Jesus. And so we have to live that out in a thoroughly secular culture, right? Our culture is not a Christian culture. But we follow Jesus. So just by that, our lives ought to look differently, shouldn't they? And this is where the framing is helpful. So thinking about, why would we be different? Why would we be different? Well, what are the two greatest commandments that we find in Scripture when it comes to Christians and how we ought to live our lives? It's to love God and love our neighbor. This is what Jesus says in Matthew 22:36. And Brett talked about this morning. When Jesus is asked, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? This is his answer. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. It's clear. This is the first. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So we start with this framework and ask, does technology make me a better servant of God and of my neighbor? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Does technology help me to do that? The frame and the context to put all of life's decisions and issues through is, does this make me a better servant of God and a better servant to my neighbor? Which of course includes our children. And I think this goes beyond, well, yeah, I use the Bible app. You know, I think we can think more broadly than this. In her book, The Gospel Comes with a House Key, Rosaria Butterfield talks about the one social media app that she uses every morning after she reads her Bible, walks her dog, has her coffee, and it's the Nextdoor app. Some of you maybe have it. So the Nextdoor app is just a neighborhood app where people get on in your local neighborhood and connect about all kinds of things. So Rosaria uses this app very intentionally. So when she gets on in the morning, she's looking. Does anyone have a need? Did someone just have a baby that she could bring a meal to? Is someone sick and needs someone to walk their dog? Did someone's car break down and needs a ride to work? And so she's intentionally using this thinking about, how can I love my neighbor well? How can I see some of the needs? And what a beautiful way to use technology to love her neighbors. And these are all scenarios, by the way, that has helped her to do that. All because of an app on her phone. So what a beautiful picture of using technology in that way. I think another way, as we think about this frame of how do we use technology to make us love God and love our neighbors well, is not only to have the mantra in our homes, we are different, is that in our churches, that we have the mindset that we are going to build an alternative culture. So, if we as Christians are called to be different, and that would include how we use technology, of course it should reflect that, in our homes and in our churches, our families should have the expectation that we'll feel different, we'll look different than the majority of people around us. And that shouldn't actually surprise us and should be something we should expect. And that's why I say make it the mantra of your family, so that it, especially when your kids are young, this will just be something that they come to expect. Oh, we will look different. But also in our church, that the church can become a place where, yeah, we maybe live different out there, but in here, this is where we're all living different, and this is where we fit, right? This is the alternative to the culture. And so if we do this regularly as families and churches, It can shape for our young kids and for our older kids what they come to think about as just being normal. And that's why it's so good if you can start this when they're young, because they just grow up thinking, oh, this is normal. This is normal. This is what it's like out there. This is what it's like in here. And this is normal to me. And so creating, for example, boundaries. And we talk about those. And then when they see outside that people don't have the same boundaries, they're not necessarily shocked, right? And so, of course, as churches, we can do the same thing. We can have spaces where we all agree, for example, hey, let's leave our phones in the car, maybe, on a Sunday morning. I mean, it sounds crazy, right? But especially if we have young people who have phones, what if we say, hey, as a church, on youth group nights, leave your phone at the door or leave it with mom and dad and just come to youth group and be with a bunch of young people who don't have their phones. Or, as I say, on a Sunday morning, maybe you decide as a family, we're all going to leave our phones in the car. I mean, most of us aren't doctors, so no one's going to die if they don't get a hold of us for an hour. My kids love when I give them this example. Because, we have a rule, for example, when we go to Grandma and Grandpa's, no phones. So we're going to get to see Grandma and Grandpa, who we don't always get to see, so I'm like, leave your phones in the car. And of course, this took a little while to create this habit. And they always groan, and then I sarcastically say, you're not a doctor, so no one's going to die. You're going to be just fine. 3 hours can go by, and no one's going to die. They're like, Mom. But really, no one's going to die if you aren't on your phone for an hour, and you do it together as a family. I think another important thing in navigating this with our young people is creating alternative culture, but then as we live in culture with our kids, that we are narrating to our kids all the time about things we see. And this is what I think that Deuteronomy 6 passage that Brett talked about this morning, doing it as we're lying down, waking up, walking around. This is where narrating is a part of our discipleship with our kids. So narrate to our kids, our grandkids, all the young people we know. Narrate the things that are happening all around us to help them see how technology, for example, pushes us in certain ways. Okay, so what do I mean by narrate? So, for example, the next time you're at a restaurant and you see a family sitting across the way and they all have devices and probably the kids have headphones on, don't just ignore it or try to block the view from your kids. Actually point it out to them and talk to your kids about it. And ask them questions. Don't do it isn't that family so dumb? That's not what I'm talking about. Point it out to them and say, now how do you think that family will remember their dinner together? How do you think they'll remember it? Do you think they'll remember it at all? Ask another question. Yeah, will they even remember their time together? And maybe see if you ever even see them talking to each other the whole meal. Just have them observe. And we do this actually so often with our kids. That's why, as I mentioned, my daughter noticed the older couple on their phones the whole dinner time the other day. And it happened a few years ago when my son and I were in the grocery store line, and I wasn't even paying attention, and we were waiting and then putting our groceries up. And there was a dad and teenage son in front of us, and they left. And then as soon as they left, my son said to me, Mom, did you see that? And I was like, see what? And he said, that kid, he was on his phone the whole time. And then he goes, he's so addicted. It's so sad. And I just cracked up and I go, oh yeah, maybe he is addicted. I mean, we're not for sure, but good observation, And it is sad because he didn't have any conversation with his dad. He was just standing there on his phone the whole time. But what we're doing is helping our kids notice. We want them to see it. And we want to help them think through it. And eventually think, yeah, I don't want to do dinners like that. So, narrate, help them to see things, and help them to see how so much of this is just being presented to us as normal. I would argue it's more normal to see people eating out together on technology than not on technology. And so just talk to your kids about that. Another just practical advice when it comes to creating a culture in your home around technology is to take it slowly. So my advice to you would be to put technology off as long as possible. Just to put it off as long as you possibly can, especially a phone. And we can talk through this a little bit more in the Q&A. But when you introduce technology into your kid's life, when eventually that comes, take it one thing at a time. Okay, so if you get your teen a phone, start with just the phone service and texting. That's what I mean. Start with just that. And see how they manage it. And walk them through that. And we're going to talk about some practical things about walking them through that. So take it slowly, one thing at a time. Then, when you start social media, start one social media platform at a time. Don't give them all 4. Okay, so start with one. See how it goes. Check in. Talk through it. This is something my husband and I had to learn the hard way with our oldest daughter, because of course your oldest one is your guinea pig, right? That's why all of the older kids in the room in your family, you know, you were your parents' guinea pig. They're really sorry. They had to try it out on someone, and it was you. So our oldest daughter was our guinea pig. So when her grandparents gave her her first iPhone, the social media came right along with it. And boy, did that create some problems for us. Because it was just too much. It was just, she jumped in too much. It was like jumping in the deep end. So we ended up having to backtrack with her and take things away, which is much more difficult. I'll tell you, if your kids aren't already there, it is much more difficult to backtrack than it is to take it slow. And that's why I give you this advice. So with the rest of the Kunkle kids, for example, when they start Instagram, we started like, okay, a 15-minute time limit. And then they earned privileges. And we navigated it with them. So they would earn privileges when they proved honesty and trustworthiness, right? With the responsibility. Because according to several studies, the age of when kids get their first phone is getting younger and younger and younger. The last I looked, I think the average age is 10 years old. So do you know a 10-year-old in your life that can handle all the responsibilities of full access to the internet? Or the self-control to actually put the thing down? Do you know a 10-year-old with self-control? No, I mean, this is way too much for them. So, a screen that just endlessly stimulates their desires to play video games, look at friends on pictures, nonstop YouTube videos, all these things. I mean, my son's 13 now, but when he was 10, I mean, I was still having to remind him to brush his teeth and force him to take a shower. Like, this kid was not ready for a phone. Just basic body cleanliness was a struggle for him, right? So, take it slowly. Another just really practical way of creating a culture in your family that takes technology and uses it differently is that before you use any device, you set boundaries. And so we started to do this with our kids with a written agreement. When Lexi got her first iPhone, we Googled cell phone contract, and this really smart mom had come up with this cell phone contract. And it was this really clever, like, 2-page thing where she just kind of went through the boundaries and rules of a phone. And she made it fun. She had some jokes in there, and it was so clever. So we took it, made it our own, and then presented to each of our kids when they finally did get a phone, we had a contract. And so we brought them into the process. We came up with our own contract. We sat down with them. We laid out the boundaries and asked them to look it over and see if this was something they could agree to. And then if they had any disagreements on any of the points of the contract, then they could come and talk to us about it. They had to have good reasons if they wanted a rule changed or something, but we talked about it. We negotiated. And then we had them sign in their blood that they would, no, I'm just kidding. We had them sign that they agreed to it and we agreed to it. And so, of course, this was quite helpful when rules were broken, because shocker, rules will get broken, and then we could reference back to it and say, hey, remember, we all agreed phones are off at 10 o'clock and plugged into the charging station in the living room. That's the rule. We all agreed to this, remember? And so it's very helpful. It brings them in the process. It dignifies them in wanting their feedback and listening to that. And then it helps to just have this agreement moving forward. This is how we're going to do things. And of course, if ever they wanted to change something, we were open to it. But they had to have good reasons for it. I think to be responsible as parents, you just have to set up filtering and monitoring. Remember what the FBI said, 500,000 active online predators every day, and that half of their victims are 12 to 15-year-olds. So protection is just part of the job. If you're going to have technology in your phone, you have to have proper protections. And so there's all kinds of products out there. You guys probably know some that we don't even know about, but Disney Circle, Covenant Eyes, Canopy, Net Nanny, there's a bunch of them. So that's the great thing, is as technology has progressed, there's more and more filtering and monitoring things that we as that are very parent friendly that we can use, and you just have to have it. Another habit that our family has made a part of our just use of technology is that we regularly unplug from technology. And we do it, not just the kids, but actually mom and dad too. So we have, for example, screen-free locations in our home. So what do I mean by a screen-free location? Well, the dinner table for one. So when we gather for food, this is not just some utilitarian task. We aren't machines that we're just filling up with fuel and then going on with our day. Especially family dinner. This is an important time of connection. So the kitchen table, dinner table, no phones. And that goes for mom and dad too. And actually, when Brett and I have forgotten this rule and our phones are in our pocket and it goes off, we get busted by our kids. And so this is a good rule to have. Of course, if dad's working or you're on call as a nurse, I understand there's exceptions. But even with those, you can talk about that as a family. So have screen-free places. In our house, this also includes the bedroom. So no one's allowed to have their phone alone in their bedroom. Bedrooms are screen-free zones. Mostly because that's where we sleep, and sleep is heavily disrupted when you have a phone next to you. That goes for adults too, but young people, there is just no question. If their phone is plugged in next to them in bed, they will not sleep as well. So we just have a charging station in our living room, and that's where the phones go to charge. So have screen-free zones. And actually, this was something I even noticed in myself, because I used to always keep my phone just charging up next to my bed. And I noticed that I would wake up in the morning and I would be anxious, oh, did I get a text about something? Have I forgotten something? I could see it in myself. And I even told my kids that. And I said, I'm plugging mine in over here too, because I can see it's changing me. And it made a huge difference. It makes a huge difference in me when I first wake up and I don't grab at my phone. But I go to the Bible. I go to the coffee machine. That makes a huge difference in my life. So even for ourselves. And then, of course, screen-free hours. So, not the first thing in the morning, not late at night. Charging it up away from us while we sleep, things like that. So having set hours where you just take a break from technology as a family. And then screen-free days, Sabbath days. In general, we try to have Sunday as kind of a screen-free day. Now, we are football fans, and so we do watch football on Sundays when football season is in. So we do that together as a family. But what I mean is we take breaks from like normal stuff. Like I try to take breaks from emails and texting even on Sundays. So if you text me on a Sunday, I'm probably not going to get back to you till Monday morning. So even thinking about a whole day where you just kind of rest and take a break. And then we'll have family trips a lot of times. The first couple days we'll take a break from technology and have that as a time we unplug. Time. Okay, so let me just go through a few of these real quick, and then Brett's going to come up and we'll do some Q&A. Okay, so practical tip is to turn off notifications. Every app, if you just set it up and don't do the settings, it will notify you, and you will constantly be chimed and chimed and chimed. So make sure that part of the rule of the family is that your kids' notifications are turned off, that they are not constantly being hounded by their phone. That's just a big practical way to not let the technology control us, but for us to control the technology. You want to come up?
We want to get into some Q&A.
Yeah. Do you want me to go through the rest of these or no?
Maybe some of that will come up in Q&A.
Okay, you're jumping around in the back, so I'm just trying to navigate. He's like doing cartwheels.
Well,
Are we going to have to share a microphone?
Oh, goodness.
No. This is going to put our marriage to a test like nothing else.
Yeah, you're going to see why we're currently in counseling. No, I thought, well, why don't we pause on this? There's so much to say on technology. We're not going to cover everything comprehensively. You're going to have the perfect plan, and now you're going to go navigate it perfectly. But I think what would be good to do, Erin has covered so much good material. Let's do some Q&A, and then we'll do a little break, because then we also got to cover another easy topic, gender. So, so why don't we pause and just do some questions. Any questions or comments or thoughts or compliments? I mean, whatever it takes here. Yeah, right here.
This presentation is an eye-opening, and I really appreciate that you guys are coming from California to take this. We have seen research about how the importance of technology, because it's a tool. It's created by man, and it's for our purpose to use in different fields, education and all the things, and the marketing and all that. And it's working, but we need to use it wisely, like you said. And there is a purpose for everything. And I think technology needs to be redirected, and we need to teach our young generation to use it wisely.
Yeah,
so
amen.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Please continue to communicate your appreciation for art. I like that. And let me just say one thing, because I think what Erin said about image of God, fallenness of man, and a theology of technology is no small thing. And that is one thing that is so powerful. Oh, we got two mics? Oh, you don't want us to fight? It's so powerful. Christianity offers the most powerful explanation of reality. And so you can see why we can say, hey, technology is amazing and wonderful, because image bearers made it. And it's also used for such evil, because image bearers who are fallen used it. So, good. Question?
Can you help with an answer to this is how kids communicate? Because kids don't use phones anymore. Kids don't use texting, like no phone call, no texting to each other. We'll take Snapchat. We use Snapchat. If you don't allow Snapchat, then they are ostracized. And I understand setting up, we are different. Just, can you give your thoughts to that, of how you're handling it? Because to choose to not allow certain things, you are making the choice that they are going to be left out of conversation.
Yeah.
So.
Erin? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, this is a difficult issue. And I'm not sure anything we'll say will be totally satisfactory, but I would exactly take us back to the point that we are different and we have to establish alternative cultures. And this is where, like, church and so at the very least, that conversation's got to begin in church. And we got to get the families together, and we got to get the youth pastor in and the youth work, and we got to have this conversation together to get on the same team, because we need everyone to help create that culture. So it's going to be a team effort, because otherwise it's going to be you and your now, and Erin and I have experienced this because of some of the standards we have in our family, but even in the church, there are some of us who are then looked at as, they're kind of the crazy Christians, right? Oh, they take the faith a little too seriously, and that's a problem. If we don't look different, if our youth group doesn't look different than how it looks at school with all the other kids, that's a problem. And we need to start, so it's going to just take some of us having courage to be different and just taking some leadership and gathering other people around together and saying, we cannot let this go on. And so we got to figure out this problem together. How do we not let kids get left out of everything? And how do we figure out ways for them to communicate in healthy ways? Because knowing that, hey, communicating through Snapchat is not neutral. Communicating through social media is not neutral. Mm-hmm. You got some thoughts?
Yeah, I think it is hard. Okay, there. Now it's working. It's a challenge, and we've had to navigate this with our 13-year-old doesn't have a phone yet. So with 4 kids so far, we've had to navigate this. It is tough, because even if you give them Snapchat, you give it to them for a few hours or whatever it is. But then, like our kids, we do have a time where phones are off. And it's like, well, so-and-so didn't respond yet, or they're going to message me and I'm not going to get back to them. And it's like, sorry, and it's like, just tell them you go dark at 10, and you won't be back on until whatever time tomorrow. And just so your friends know, like, I don't, and so you can be empathetic. Like, listen, I don't want your friends to think you're a jerk, but just tell them, oh, my mom makes me turn it off at 10, and just have this. And again, if you can start this when they get it, it is so helpful. Parents of young kids, if you can start it when they first get it, it is so much more helpful. We have had to backtrack. So it's very difficult to do that, and it takes courage, but you can do it. You can be different, and you can just force your kids in that way to be different. But you can still be empathetic. I know your friends don't have any limits. I know they're on till 1 a.m. I get it. But I don't think that's good for them. And I'll read this with you, and I'll read this article to you and show you what it does to you when your phone is on all night. Like, Mom's not just making this up. I'm not being mean. It's because I actually care about you. So you can make efforts in that way to show them why you have the rules you do, and to say, hey, I get it. I understand. I've had times where I feel different than all my friends too. So I've talked openly with my kids about things like, yeah, I know, a bunch of my friends at Bible study, they all watch The Bachelor, and I don't. I get it. Like, you feel weird when you don't watch the favorite show that everyone else is watching. And so to empathize in that way, like, I've had to be different too. So things like that would be, it takes courage. I get it. It's hard.
Yeah, and I would also say, so I think this is a lot of the technology questions are going to be difficult, because you have multiple streams kind of flowing into this problem. Mm-hmm. So here's one thing I would encourage you to do. So Jonathan Haidt, Haidt, He has an online newsletter called After Babel. He's going through, he wrote a book called Anxious Generation. All right, so I hope this will spark more research on your part. First book you should go get and read is Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And he says, look, we've got the biggest mental health crisis of any generation in our Gen Zers. And he says 2 main reasons. We've underprotected in the digital world. And then we've also overprotected in the real world. We've coddled the kids. Those 2 things have led to tremendous mental health problems, okay? Now, so there's not going to be, it's complex. There's not going to be any one easy solution on something like this because, so I just was reading his online newsletter this last week, and he's saying, hey, there's actually a precondition for where we're at right now with technology, and it's the growing, there's kind of the breakdown of community in our culture, right? This more kind of isolation and this atomism where just the loss of kind of structures in our culture that foster community. And there's all kinds of things like that. You know, the decrease in the church, the decrease in social institutions that are healthy and all of this. So that you've got that. And so then now you've got this increased loneliness that nudges our kids to only place they can find community is through something like this. So I mean, it's a complex issue. And we've got it. But we in the church we should be leading the culture. We should be thinking hard about this and figuring out how can we lead the culture in something like this. If we come up with ways that we can thrive, that can be a model. That can be such a light for the culture out there. So anyway, all right. There was a question right here. Yeah.
I was going to say that as a student, something that is a big problem is just FOMO in general. Where if there's a group of friends that do have Snapchat, like I don't have Snapchat, but I do have friends that do, and they'll send pictures of them with filters and blah blah blah. Something that we have to be aware of is that if we're being left out of certain conversations where everyone's having a group chat without you, maybe you're not supposed to be in those group chats. Maybe there's something that like my mom is trying to protect me from, or something that I should be protecting myself from. Because, as a whole, FOMO and anxiety is obviously such a big problem now because of technology, to where sometimes I'm just like, maybe I should just write letters to people. Like, maybe I should just put it in the mailbox.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know some of you in the back couldn't hear her, but thank you for your honesty, by the way, and for what you said. She said, for young people like her, FOMO is a real thing. FOMO, fear of missing out. This generation talks in text like that, in case you didn't know. I joke with my kids. I'm like, don't talk to me in text. Like, use the words. But anyway, so FOMO, fear of missing out. And it's a real thing. And I think teaching kids how to cope with that is one of the best things you can teach them, because FOMO is not going away. And adults, if you're on social media, you can relate to that too. Like these families that seem to get to go on vacation when you can't afford a vacation. Or like these moms that make like these amazing dinners, and I just made scrambled eggs for dinner, and you're like, wow, mom of the year right here. So we experience it too. And then I think just being open to talking about it is a big thing. And I remember one of our daughters, when she was 18, we were driving somewhere, and I said, you seem like you're upset. And then she ended up crying and saying, I feel like I miss out on everything. I feel like everybody's doing great things, and I'm doing nothing. I'm lame, blah, 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 blah. So she goes in this whole thing. She's not lame. Like, I think she's great, So, but I understand, and I've read so much, and we've read with our kids too. So I know, I bet it's social media that's really nurturing this in her. So I said to her, okay, what if you and we do an experiment, and for the next week, you and I will both take breaks from social media, and we'll do it together. And we'll take Instagram and Facebook off of our phones. We both won't look at it. And then at the end of the week, we'll go to breakfast and we'll just see. We'll just see if it helps at all with this. And so we did it, and we took a break together, and then we went to breakfast. And then I said, okay, so what did you think about this week? And then she starts saying how she felt like almost a weight was lifted off her. And she felt a lot happier that week. And then I shared with her some of my observations about myself. And I remember that week in particular saying to her, I notice when Dad's traveling, I want to be on social media more, especially when you guys go to bed. So I told her, I think when Dad's gone and I'm feeling lonely, I feel pulled towards social media. And she was like, really, Mom? And I'm like, yes, because I'm just like you, you know. So doing this with our kids and saying, hey, I feel it too. Like, I feel it too. And learning how to cope and find community and talking about it is so helpful. And I think one of the keys actually in the we are different, this is one of the keys of doing it, is talking about how it feels when we are different.
Well, and one of the other things that Jonathan Haidt talks about is we can't just take it away and then kind of like, okay, go. We have to figure out ways to replace that. And so, and this is where he's talking about, so like for, I guess an example of this would be like with our son, we try to keep him off the screens. His buddies always want to play video games. Sometimes we let him do that, but then it's like, no, we're not going to play video games every single day for 3 hours a day. And so, but okay, so what do? Well, one thing we do is we just kind of kick him outside, push him outside. And then what he does, he pulls his other buddies outside, and then they end up playing ball. They go riding their bikes. They go on adventures, and so they replace that time on a screen. And so I think that's a principle that we need to use is, all right, we're going to take away screen time or limit screen time. What else can we help them see we can put in there in the place of it? Mm-hmm. So we're not just saying no, but okay, say yes to these good things, mm-hmm. Okay? All right, we're going to do this. We've been going for a good hour and 20 minutes or so now, right?
Hour and 10.
Hour and 10. Let's take a little break here so you can stretch, move around. Erin and I will both hang out up here. For some of you who didn't get to ask your questions, we'd love to keep talking about that. But we'll give, can we do a 10-minute break? 10-minute break, and then come back and we'll jump into the gender stuff.